Security moved toward me as my brother Nolan stepped into my place and shook hands for the offer that was supposed to be mine. Applause filled the room while my stomach dropped. I stayed seated, fingers locked, face still. He spoke calmly about leadership and trust, then said I had become unreliable. People nodded. No one asked me anything. This was public, clean, and cruel. My name is Brooke, and the person who ruined my future in that room was my own brother. I felt heat behind my eyes, but I swallowed it. I watched his smile, the one he used when he lied. When the meeting ended, he leaned close and whispered that family comes second to winners. I smelled his cologne and felt sick. That moment burned itself into me. I went home and sat on my bed without turning on the light. I replayed every email, every favor, every time I covered for him. He thought I would explode. He was wrong. I opened my laptop and started writing dates, names, and proof. I made copies and backups. I did not rush. I did not warn him. I chose patience. He took my opportunity in front of everyone. I decided I would make sure he saw the truth slowly, clearly, and everywhere it mattered to me fully. The next morning I walked into the office as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. Nolan was already there, standing taller, talking louder, enjoying the attention that used to drift toward me. I kept my head straight and my steps even. Inside, my thoughts were sharp and busy. I replayed the meeting and focused on details instead of pain. Who nodded? Who stayed silent? Who looked unsure? At my desk, I opened old folders and emails. I found messages where Nolan missed deadlines and asked me to fix them. I found files I wrote that carried his name. My hand stayed steady. I saved everything twice. At lunch, someone asked if I was okay. I smiled and said yes. Nolan watched from across the room, waiting for a crack. He did not get one. That night, I sat alone and built a timeline. Dates lined up too cleanly. This was not luck. This was habit. He let me work and stepped in at the end. That truth hurt more than losing the offer. Still, I stayed calm. I was not planning revenge. I was planning clarity. Truth moves slowly, but it always lands hard. Nolan thought the story was finished. He was wrong. I was just beginning to shape the ending myself. The call came late that afternoon from our supervisor, asking me to come by her office. I walked in calm, shoulders relaxed, voice level. She spoke about concerns, about reliability, about tone. I listened without defending myself. When she finished, I asked one question. What proof supported those claims? She paused longer than she meant to. I thanked her and left. Back at my desk, I felt eyes on me. Nolan was watching closely now. His smile was tight. That mattered. That evening, I added another page to my notes labeled witnesses. I wrote names and moments in clean lines. I remembered Nolan asking me to send work from his login. I remembered him calling me sensitive when I questioned him. This was not confusion. This was planning. I did not sleep much, but I did not panic. I prepared. I knew my next move had to be small and quiet. People like Nolan believe silence means weakness. They always overtalk. I sent one short email asking him to clarify a detail. He replied quickly, confident and careless. His words did not match what he told the panel. I saved the message and leaned back. The truth had started moving. Nolan just didn't know it yet. That would cost him everything later. The next day, Nolan acted generous, offering coffee and loud jokes, as if nothing stood between us. I thanked him politely and kept notes in my head. His ease confirmed my plan. At noon, an email went out praising his leadership on the project I built. I felt the sting but not surprise. I forwarded the message to myself and tagged a date and time. After work, I met a former teammate who had seen Nolan reuse my drafts before. I asked simple questions and listened. She confirmed details and agreed to write a statement later if needed. I did not push. Pressure scares truth away. That night, I organized files by week and labeled changes in style. Patterns appeared like footprints. Nolan wrote fast and shallow. My work was careful and clear. I printed samples and highlighted differences. I slept lightly but steady. In the morning, Nolan bragged about the offer again, louder this time. He wanted witnesses. I gave him none. Instead, I requested a skills review from HR, framing it as growth. The meeting was set. Nolan smiled when he heard, thinking I was desperate. He did not know I had prepared exhibits, timelines, and calm words. I wasn't chasing the offer anymore. I was building a mirror. Soon, he would be forced to look at last. The HR meeting arrived faster than I expected, and Nolan showed up smiling like this was already won. I greeted everyone calmly and took my seat. When they asked why I requested the review, I spoke slowly and stayed factual. I said I wanted clarity on authorship and process. I placed printed samples on the table and explained timelines. No anger. No blame. Nolan laughed once and said I was confused. I watched his hands tap. That told me enough. HR asked questions. I answered with dates and files. Nolan answered with stories. The room shifted. After the meeting, he pulled me aside and warned me to drop it. I nodded and thanked him. That night, I added his warning to my notes. The next morning, HR asked for digital copies. I sent them clean and complete. Nolan sent nothing. By afternoon, rumors slowed. By evening, my inbox changed tone. People asked for details instead of judging. I stayed kind and brief. Nolan stopped joking. He started pacing. I realized the truth was not loud. It was patient, and it was finally being heard. I felt pressure lift from my chest while fear moved to him, and I understood patience had turned the room, the records, and the future toward me at last without shouting once or begging for mercy. Nolan stopped talking to me at work, and that silence felt heavy. People noticed. Meetings grew careful. I kept my tone warm and my notes precise. HR asked follow-up questions, and I answered within minutes. Nolan delayed. He blamed travel, then stress. Each excuse arrived late and thin. I added them to my file. One afternoon, a manager asked me to walk through the project history. I spoke plainly and showed versions side by side. The differences were clear. Nolan watched the screen and swallowed. Afterward, he cornered me near the elevators and said I was tearing the family apart. I told him I wanted accuracy. Nothing more. He scoffed and said I would regret this. I wrote that down too. At home, I backed up everything again and practiced calm answers. I slept better. The next day, HR scheduled a joint review. Nolan asked to postpone. The request was denied. In the room, he talked fast and drifted. I stayed slow and grounded. When the questions tightened, his story bent. Mine did not. The meeting ended without smiles. As I left, I felt a quiet click inside. The truth had weight now, and it was pulling hard toward daylight. That pressure promised consequences he could not outrun once records met memory in rooms where decisions last longer. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, reviewing every version of the report Nolan had edited. The changes were subtle, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know the project inside out. But I did. Every small shift that favored him over me was logged, highlighted, and dated. My fingers tightened around the mug, and I felt a pulse of cold satisfaction. I wasn't acting on anger, I was acting on evidence. The plan formed quietly, methodically. The next morning, I forwarded a full timeline to HR with annotations. Each note showed his omissions, delays, and the tiny manipulations he'd woven into the work. I didn't need to exaggerate. The facts did it all. Nolan saw me send it. His face tightened. No words, just the twitch of his jaw. Later, a colleague pulled me aside, whispering about his panic, how he realized the game had shifted. I nodded slightly, hiding my satisfaction. At home, I updated my files again. Screenshots, timestamps, emails, layered proof that couldn't be argued with. I imagined the moment he would finally have to face it, when every excuse, every smirk, every casual dismissal would collapse under the weight of recorded truth. And I smiled quietly. This wasn't the end yet. It was just the first real step toward showing him the truth and making sure he felt every consequence of his arrogance. The next morning, Nolan arrived early, his usual swagger muted. He glanced at my desk, noticed the folders stacked neatly, labeled, color-coded. His eyes flicked up when I greeted him, forced cheer in my voice. He said nothing, only nodded. I could feel the tension rolling off him in waves, heavy, desperate. During the meeting with our supervisor, I presented my section of the project with calm precision, answering questions clearly, citing data, showing every point of my work. Nolan tried to interject, tried to claim credit for adjustments he hadn't made, but the timeline I prepared neutralized every word. My supervisor raised an eyebrow at him, then at me, silent judgment clear. By the end, it was obvious to everyone who had contributed what. Nolan's cheeks flushed, his confidence cracking. Later, I returned to my office and quietly began planning the next phase. This wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about making him understand that manipulation has consequences. Every email I drafted, every log I updated, every witness I noted was a brick in the structure I was building. I didn't need confrontation. I needed inevitability, and he had no idea it was coming. When he finally realized, it would be too late to reclaim any advantage. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, watching him shuffle papers across his desk. The game had changed, and I held every piece. That afternoon, Nolan tried subtle sabotage. He emailed my supervisor, hinting that I might have missed a deadline, casually inserting doubt. I read it quietly, heart steady, and still. I already had timestamps, project logs, and screenshots proving I had completed my part on time. I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit, let him stew. When our supervisor called me into the office, I calmly presented the evidence. Every completed task, every timestamp, every detail he tried to twist. Nolan sat across the room, shifting uncomfortably, unable to interrupt. The supervisor's expression softened toward me and grew stern toward him. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I let the facts speak louder than his lies ever could. Walking back to my office, I realized something crucial. Nolan underestimated me. He thought I would react emotionally, that his underhanded tactics would rattle me. Instead, they sharpened me. I opened my notebook, jotting a plan for the next moves. Every manipulation he tried to weave would now work against him. I noted witnesses who had seen his attempts, recorded emails, and created a timeline of interactions. My pulse was calm, but a quiet thrill ran through me. This wasn't just about defending my work. This was about setting the stage for the moment he finally understood that deceit carries consequences. And I would make sure he saw every piece of it, unfolding with precision. By Friday, the office buzzed with rumors, and Nolan felt it. He hovered near my desk, asking soft questions, pretending concern. I answered politely, nothing more. That afternoon, the client asked for a progress review. I volunteered to share documentation. In the conference room, I connected my laptop and displayed a clean timeline, files named, changes tracked, comments dated. Faces leaned forward. Nolan tried to joke, but his laugh fell flat. When the client asked about a missing revision, I opened an email chain showing his delay, not mine. Silence followed. I felt my shoulders loosen as truth settled in. After the meeting, our supervisor thanked me for clarity and asked Nolan to stay behind. I walked out slowly, breathing steady. At my desk, I archived backups to a secure drive and forwarded summaries to myself. I wasn't rushing. I was building certainty. Later, Nolan messaged me, angry but careful, asking why I made him look bad. I didn't reply. I reviewed policy notes, whistle rules, and performance standards. The path was clear. He had chosen shortcuts. I chose records. The difference would decide everything. I kept copies at home, mirrored logs in cloud storage, and noted witnesses by time and place, knowing patience beats force, and daylight exposes patterns liars can't outrun when pressure rises and stories collapse fast. That weekend, I went through every shared folder, every version history, every note. I created a master timeline, dates, edits, messages, comments, approvals. Everything Nolan had done, or failed to do, was documented. I realized how careless he had been, assuming no one would notice. I smiled quietly. He thought his charm and casual explanations would carry him. He had underestimated the power of precision. Monday morning, I arrived early. The office was quiet. I checked the client's inbox. No complaints, no questions, because I had preempted every possible confusion with clear, verified files. Nolan stormed in later, trying to act normal, but I could see the tension. I greeted him calmly, smiled faintly, and returned to my work. Every glance he threw was sharp but empty. At lunch, I overheard him whispering to a coworker, trying to spin the situation. I took notes mentally, logging every word. Each attempt he made to salvage credibility only added to the record. By afternoon, HR called him in for a routine performance review. I stayed at my desk, calmly sipped water, and watched. When he returned, his face was pale. He avoided eye contact, muttering excuses. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I had created a system where truth mattered. And in that system, mistakes became exposure, arrogance became proof, and patience became the weapon he never saw coming. That evening, I sat in my apartment, reviewing the files I had compiled over the past week. Every message, every misstep, every casual lie from Nolan was documented. I spread them out like pieces of a puzzle, seeing the full picture of how he had sabotaged me and tried to cover it with charm. The worst part, he didn't even realize it yet. I smiled faintly, a quiet, controlled thrill coursing through me. I didn't need to confront him directly. I just needed him to see the consequences of his arrogance. The next day, I submitted a polished summary to HR, outlining the timeline of the project, clarifying my contributions, and showing where Nolan had deviated from the plan. I included evidence of his attempts to mislead both the client and the team. By mid-morning, HR called me in. Their tone was serious, attentive. They acknowledged the clarity and thoroughness of my documentation. Later, I saw Nolan in the hallway. His confident swagger had vanished. He tried a weak smile, but I didn't respond. I walked past him with calm purpose, letting the tension hang in the air. Every step he took now felt uncertain and measured. He was finally seeing that his careless arrogance and manipulations had consequences. I didn't rush the process. I let the evidence speak, and the longer I waited, the more inevitable his exposure became. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying every conversation, every subtle twist Nolan had used to undermine me. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee in hand, staring at the stack of notes I had meticulously compiled. Each one was a small victory in waiting, proof that his betrayal was not unnoticed. I thought about how he had gloated the week before, confident that I'd never catch the patterns, never see the truth behind his charm. But I had, and now it was only a matter of time. I drafted a careful email, not to confront him, but to summarize my work for the higher-ups, showing exactly where he had deviated from the plan, the consequences, and the potential risks he created. I didn't include emotion, didn't hint at resentment. Just facts. Precise, undeniable facts. When I sent it, I felt a strange satisfaction, a sense of calm power. The next morning, I noticed a subtle shift in the office. Colleagues avoided eye contact with him, and some hesitated when speaking to him. The whispers were quieter, replaced by careful glances at my desk and my computer screen. Nolan, for the first time, seemed cautious, almost paranoid. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Every action I had taken, every patient, measured step I had planned was working. He was finally starting to see that his arrogance would cost him everything. I spent the morning reviewing every interaction Nolan had with clients over the past month. Emails, messages, meeting notes, everything. Patterns emerged, small but significant errors he had made, deliberately ignored or covered up. I documented each one, creating a timeline that left no room for doubt. By lunch, I had compiled a detailed report highlighting the mistakes that had cost me the opportunity he'd stolen. I didn't send it yet. Timing mattered. Every move had to be strategic. Later that afternoon, I requested a brief one-on-one with our manager. Nolan didn't notice at first. He was too absorbed in his own sense of triumph. As I entered the office, I smiled calmly, neutral, unbothered. I laid the report on the desk, explaining each point clearly, fact by fact. My manager's eyes widened. Questions followed, subtle but pointed. I answered with patience, without emotion, letting the evidence speak. Outside the office, Nolan's expression shifted from smug confidence to unease. I could see it in the way his hands trembled when reaching for his coffee, the sharpness in his breath, the tension in his jaw. He finally realized I had anticipated him. The atmosphere had changed, subtly but undeniably. For the first time, he understood that his actions were visible, documented, and no longer safe. My revenge wasn't loud, but it was precise. And it was working. That evening, I stayed late at the office, reviewing every interaction Nolan had with our clients over the past year. I noticed subtle manipulations, moments he had twisted information to make himself look better and me look incompetent. Each note, Each misstep became another thread in the web I was weaving. I drafted a formal report, concise and factual, highlighting the discrepancies without emotion. I knew the moment to deliver it had to be perfect, when he least expected it, yet when it would have maximum impact. The next morning, I saw him in the break room, coffee in hand, smug grin plastered across his face. He had no idea what was coming. I approached calmly, neutral expression, and mentioned casually that I'd prepared a summary of recent client interactions for management review. He raised an eyebrow, curiosity turning to suspicion. By mid-morning, I had the manager's attention. One by one, I laid out the documented errors, the timelines, the missed follow-ups, all clearly marked and sourced. Nolan's confidence crumbled quietly, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it in the tension of his shoulders, the tight grip on his pen, the shallow breaths. The manager asked questions, and I answered clearly, without hesitation. Each point chipped away at his inflated image. By the time the meeting ended, Nolan was visibly shaken. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it would grow. I had made my move, subtle but unstoppable. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk, trying not to show the rush of satisfaction simmering beneath my calm exterior. Nolan didn't approach me, didn't even glance my way, but I could feel the shift in the air. Whispers started almost immediately. Colleagues who had once laughed at his jokes, or nodded along with his opinions, now looked at him differently. He was smaller somehow, less confident. I pulled out my folder again, reviewing the notes, checking that nothing was missing. Everything had to be airtight. One mistake could undo all of this. Late that afternoon, a client called my manager directly, praising the thorough work I'd done in preparing the summary. They mentioned that the errors they'd previously experienced with Nolan's handling were now clearly documented, and they appreciated the transparency. I smiled faintly, hiding behind a calm, neutral expression. Nolan was seated nearby, fuming quietly, but the manager had all the facts. I could see the frustration in his jaw, the tight line of his lips, the way he avoided eye contact with anyone in the room. He had underestimated me. He had assumed I would sit silently, let him take credit, and absorb the blame when his mistakes were discovered. Instead, I had turned the spotlight back on him, methodically, strategically. And the truth, it was unstoppable. By the time the day ended, Nolan wasn't just shaken, he was exposed. And I had every intention of ensuring he felt it fully. That night, I stayed late at the office, reviewing every email, every report, every meeting note Nolan had ever sent me for the past 3 months. Each one told a story, and the story he'd told to others never matched the facts. I compiled a timeline, marking every misstep, every exaggeration, every misleading statement. It felt almost cathartic, watching the evidence pile up like a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to him. I sent a quiet, neutral message to my manager, attaching the most egregious examples. Carefully worded, entirely factual, no commentary, just dates and evidence. Within hours, HR had responded, scheduling a review meeting with both of us. I didn't panic. I didn't gloat. I had rehearsed every line, every question they could possibly ask. I had anticipated every defensive tactic Nolan might use. That evening, I left the office slowly, pretending to check emails while inside. A quiet storm was brewing. I imagined Nolan at home, probably pacing, trying to craft some explanation that could survive scrutiny. But I knew the truth didn't need embellishment. The documents, the dates, the missteps, they were enough. And I had preserved every single one. By the next morning, I felt a surge of quiet confidence. Nolan could try to spin a story, but the pieces were already locked in place. This was the long game, and he had no idea the level of precision he was up against. I wasn't just going to prove the truth, I was going to make him see it with his own eyes. The HR office felt colder than usual when I walked in. Nolan was already there, leaning back in his chair, trying to look casual, his smug smile barely hiding the tension in his jaw. I sat across from him quietly, placing my folder on the table, neatly organized, every page labeled and dated. HR looked at me expectantly. I started calmly, walking them through the timeline. Every misleading email, every half-truth, every instance where he had twisted facts to make me look incompetent, I laid it out with quiet precision. Nolan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to each page, his hands tightening on the armrests. He tried to interject once, but HR politely cut him off, clearly focused on the evidence I presented. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roll my eyes. I let the facts speak. HR nodded as I concluded, asking questions only to clarify details. Nolan's smugness slipped, replaced with a tight, forced calm. I noticed it, the first real crack in his confident facade. When the meeting ended, HR promised a full review. Nolan left the room stiffly, barely making eye contact. I followed slowly, maintaining my neutral expression, but inside, my heart was pounding. Every step had been calculated, and now the first seeds of doubt were planted firmly in his mind. He had underestimated me, and by the time he realized it, it would be too late. This was just the beginning. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming beside me, and reviewed every interaction with Nolan again. I went over emails, chat logs, and meeting notes, every detail carefully cataloged. Each time he had sabotaged me, forwarding my work late, taking credit for my ideas, spreading rumors, it was all documented. My fingers tightened around my pen as I traced the patterns. I could see his overconfidence clearly now. He thought no one noticed, thought I would silently accept it, thought I would crumble. But he hadn't counted on patience, on precision. I drafted a plan, not impulsive, not emotional, but strategic. Every move I made from here on out would be measured, predictable only to me, impossible to refute. I imagined Nolan reading HR's final report, realizing that every attempt to undermine me had left a clear trail. I smiled quietly. His arrogance was a map to his own undoing. That night, I sent a subtle message to a coworker who had unknowingly been caught in his schemes. Nothing revealing, just enough to hint that the full story was about to surface. I leaned back in my chair, feeling calm but electric with anticipation. Every slip Nolan had made, every overreach, every casual assumption that he was untouchable, it would all converge. The countdown had begun, and when it ended, he would see exactly who had outsmarted him. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing had happened, my heels clicking against the tile floor, my expression neutral, calm. Nolan was already there, smirking at a colleague as if he owned the place. I passed him without a word, heading straight for my desk. My hands were steady, my mind sharp, replaying every detail of the plan. Today, I would begin executing it. The first step was subtle. A carefully crafted email to HR outlining each incident of interference, every missed deadline he had caused, every piece of work he had claimed as his own. Dates, times, witnesses, everything documented in black and white. I clicked send and felt a thrill rush through me. The trap was set. Around noon, I overheard whispers. People were talking, some nervously, some suspiciously. Nolan's smug smile faltered slightly. I didn't look at him. I didn't react. I let the tension do the work. By mid-afternoon, HR requested a meeting with both of us. My pulse stayed steady, my notes perfectly organized. As I entered the room, I noticed the slight hesitation in Nolan's step, the twitch in his jaw. He hadn't expected me to fight back, had underestimated me completely. I presented the evidence methodically, calmly, letting facts speak louder than anger. Every question HR asked, every doubt they expressed, traced directly back to his own actions. The power had shifted. He would feel it soon. Nolan sat across from me in the HR office, his usual smirk replaced by a stiff, guarded expression. I laid out each instance clearly, the missed deadlines, the stolen credit, the subtle sabotage that no one outside the office had noticed. HR listened, nodding slowly, flipping through the documents I had compiled. I didn't flinch, didn't speak louder than necessary, didn't let emotion betray me. Every word, every fact, every piece of evidence was deliberate. Nolan tried to interject, to twist the story, but HR held him back politely, asking him to answer calmly and provide proof. He stumbled almost immediately, his memory fuzzy, his excuses weak, his arrogance now a liability. I watched him shrink in real time, the confident brother everyone admired reduced to someone fumbling for credibility. I stayed quiet when a small smirk of panic appeared on his face. My only response was a subtle tightening of my grip on my notes. By the end of the meeting, HR's tone had changed. They were no longer neutral, they were carefully evaluating him, questioning him, doubting him. The evidence spoke too clearly, too precisely, and Nolan's attempts to rewrite the narrative were crumbling in front of me. As we left the office, I caught the flash of recognition in his eyes. He finally understood that I wasn't just fighting back. I had already won the strategy, and he had walked right into it. That evening, I returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. I spread all of Nolan's emails, memos, and my own notes across the dining table. Every message, every manipulated fact, every half-truth he had tried to feed others was laid bare. I traced patterns, timelines, and contradictions, seeing clearly how he had overreached. My phone buzzed. It was my colleague Mia. "Emily, did you see Nolan's response? He's panicking." I smiled faintly, sipping my coffee. This was exactly the momentum I needed. Panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy leaves a trail. I started drafting a timeline for HR and our supervisor, highlighting every instance where his arrogance had led him to lie or omit facts. Every step was methodical. Every step was precise. I didn't rush, didn't brag, didn't react publicly. I waited for him to expose himself further. Hours later, I received another forwarded message from a mutual friend. Nolan had tried to spin the story to another coworker, claiming I had sabotaged him first. It was laughable. He didn't realize the network I had quietly built, the evidence I had archived, and the careful attention I had paid to every detail. His lies were now transparent, and every attempt to manipulate perception only added to his downfall. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, mind calm. The more he tried to control the story, the more he revealed his own recklessness, and I was ready to use it against him. That evening, I returned home, exhausted but exhilarated. I spread all of Nolan's emails, memos, and my own notes across the dining table. Every message, every manipulated fact, every half-truth he had tried to feed others was laid bare. I traced patterns, timelines, and contradictions, seeing clearly how he had overreached. My phone buzzed. It was my colleague Mia. "Emily, did you see Nolan's response? He's panicking." I smiled faintly, sipping my coffee. This was exactly the momentum I needed. Panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy leaves a trail. I started drafting a timeline for HR and our supervisor, highlighting every instance where his arrogance had led him to lie or omit facts. Every step was methodical. Every step was precise. I didn't rush, didn't brag, didn't react publicly. I waited for him to expose himself further. Hours later, I received another forwarded message from a mutual friend. Nolan had tried to spin the story to another coworker, claiming I had sabotaged him first. It was laughable. He didn't realize the network I had quietly built, the evidence I had archived, and the careful attention I had paid to every detail. His lies were now transparent, and every attempt to manipulate perception only added to his downfall. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, mind calm. The more he tried to control the story, the more he revealed his own recklessness, and I was ready to use it against him. By mid-afternoon, the shift was undeniable. Emails circulated subtly among the team, references to missed deadlines, inaccurate reports, and a pattern of manipulations that only someone following my careful documentation could notice. Nolan tried to speak up during a meeting, to twist the narrative again, but even his closest allies were hesitant, glancing at each other, unsure whether to believe him. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with the thrilling certainty that the long game was working. Every piece of evidence I had gathered, every small detail I had preserved, now formed a web so tight that his lies couldn't slip through. I caught his eye once, briefly, and the shift in his expression was subtle but perfect, a mixture of panic and disbelief. He realized that for the first time, the audience he had tried to manipulate was seeing the story differently, seeing him clearly. And I knew exactly how this would end. By evening, I watched as he sent private messages to try and repair the damage, carefully worded, but clumsy and reactive. Every word he typed betrayed his fear. He was unraveling in slow motion, and I didn't interfere. I let him dig deeper with his own hands, every action cementing the inevitability of his exposure. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, savoring the quiet satisfaction that comes when justice is delivered not with noise, but with precision and patience. This was poetic, unshakable, and entirely his own doing. The final day arrived like a storm I had been waiting for. Nolan sent a long, desperate email to the leadership team, attempting to explain his version of events, weaving in half-truths and emotional pleas, but it only highlighted the inconsistencies I had documented. I opened the thread calmly, word by word, and for the first time, allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Every lie, every omission, every manipulative twist he had tried to use as power was now exposed in plain sight. My colleagues, who had once hesitated, now nodded knowingly, referencing facts and timelines I had prepared meticulously. Nolan's arrogance had been his downfall. He had thought that fear, charm, and whispers could control perception. Instead, they had left a perfect trail straight to the truth, a trail only I could have laid out. I watched him shrink under the weight of his own exposure, the confident mask slipping away in real time. By evening, he was no longer speaking in meetings, avoiding eye contact, and quietly clearing his desk. I walked past him once, steady and composed, my hands relaxed at my sides, my chest light with calm victory. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need revenge. The truth had done the work. My opportunity was intact, my reputation restored, and my boundaries respected. Nolan had lost, not by my anger, but by his own arrogance and recklessness. I exhaled, finally free. I was stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. My name is Claire, and I survived betrayal to rise unshakable.